Well, good afternoon. Um, this is actually the first Empowered Legacy session for our Step 2 program. The purpose of this session really is to, um, originally is to allow new members to the program to have the opportunity to review all of the information they got when they began working with us as part of the Truth About Estate Planning workshop. They learn a lot about the maintenance program, but then they go through a fairly lengthy um, process of counseling, and by the time they're finished with that, it's very easy for them to forget what comes next. So the next step for most people once they've started their funding is to have an empowered legacy session. But we thought that it'd be a really great idea to have it for our Step 2 members and their helpers because it's not always true that everybody really remembers everything that's going on with the program, and it's helpful to refresh people's memory about what we're doing and why we're doing it. So the agenda for today is to give you a quick background review of where we are and what we're doing. I'm going to show the Step 2 program's website because that's really an integral part of the kind of information that we're able to provide to people. And the part of that is the year in review. That basically gives you an overall view of what goes on throughout the year in the program. We'll talk about funding updates and the details about that. We'll talk about the annual client meeting. And then we'll go on to, in particular, we'll talk a little bit about the Blue Book and what's in it and why it's there. Then there's the Client Update Program, also referred to as CUP, C-U-P. And finally, we'll talk about the member agreement and the investment summary. And as part of the whole thing, we're going to talk a little bit about the personal legacy program that we're hopefully going to start this year. We're talking to the advisory board about. So a lot of what we do is premised on what we call the truth about estate planning, and the truth about estate planning is that most estate plans just don't work. So why do we say that? Well, we have something called the snapshot test, and what that means is, if you die and you're up in the clouds, up in heaven, looking down, and you are looking down and seeing what everybody's doing. If they're running around doing the things that you expected them to do based on your instructions, then everything's going along fine. Anything else is unacceptable. So the purpose of a lot of the planning that we do is to make sure that we meet the snapshot test. Now, for most of our clients, the snapshot isn't particularly clear when they come to us, so it's part of our job to sort of help them sharpen that, what that snapshot looks like. And so we start with the definition of estate planning, which you're all familiar with. I want to control my property while I'm alive and well, plan for me and my loved ones if I become disabled, and then give what I have to whom I want, when I want, and the way that I want, all while assuring my wisdom is transferred along with the rest of my wealth. And I notice that there are some people who've just come on. Everybody's muted right now, but if you want to ask a question, use the chat box in the lower part of the GoToMeeting screen and type in the word question, and I'll stop and unmute you. So the keys to an effective estate plan are four, essentially. The first one is having personalized counseling, and that's one of our big issues that we have with a lot of the counseling that goes on today. Most people don't really get the counseling they need, and so we see it as our job to make sure they do. Of course, proper asset ownership, also referred to as funding, is extremely important. And then having a formal review process so that everything gets reviewed on a regular basis. You can have the greatest plan that I can give you, and then 3 or 4 years later, you'll have changes in your life. I'll have had new experiences, learned new things. A lot will have changed, and you'd much rather have the plan that I'm giving to somebody now than the one you got 3 or 4 or 5 or even 10 years ago. So the purpose of one of the things that we're trying to do is to make sure everybody has their plans reviewed on a regular basis. And when they do, the result of that is that the other key, the final key to an effective plan, is that they can control the transfer process. And by that we mean that they can do, the people who are running around carrying out the snapshot will know what to do, how to do it, and how to pay for it. Because, if they don't, then they're kind of at the mercy of whomever they go to help with a state settlement. And if they don't really know what to do, how to do it, and how to pay for it, then whatever price that person says, they won't know whether it's reasonable or not. So part of what we're trying to do is to disclose what it should be and give people a better idea of what they should expect. So the strategy that we recommend to everybody, and you've all heard this, is called the 3-step strategy. And that is to develop your plan with counseling-oriented planning partners. Note that that means not just the attorney, but your financial advisors, your accountants, anybody else that's involved in your planning. The second step is to commit yourself and your family to a formal and continuous maintenance and education program. And the third step is to secure appropriate assistance for you and your family to transfer your wisdom along with the rest of your wealth. So, of course, the first part is the counseling part, and this is the screen that we really talk at great length about in our Truth About Estate Planning workshop, or when we're meeting with clients individually. We do that now and go through this with them individually. And those are the primary planning goals that people have, other than tax-related goals, because we'll tell people that tax is actually the easiest part of the planning for us. The harder part is to deal with the things that are most important to them, and that if they knew solutions to, they would most likely adopt them. So our job is to help people become informed and understand what those are. So when we do that, we teach them through stories, of course. So here's what I wanted to do. Right here is where I'd like to show you a little bit about the website that we have for our clients. So here's the Heritage Design Law website. It's a brand new website, started this year. We've had professional help putting together, and we had them put on a little client sign-in button for our Step 2 members. So if you click on that button, it will take you to a sign-in screen. Hopefully it will play with me today. And then you put in the username Step 2. Note there's a space and a precap for S. And then the password is member with a capital M, M-E-M-B-E-R. So if you type that in and you log in, then you will come to this page. So here is the Step 2 Resource Center that we've put together for everybody in the Step 2 program. It's organized primarily with documents that you can download that are very important or will help you in understanding what's going on in the Step 2 program. And I'll be pointing out a number of things as we go along. But one of the most important things is the stories. So if you want to have a summary of the stories, and this is located in your Blue Book, we'll talk about the Blue Book in a couple of minutes, but this is the summary. You can download this. And of course, this is what it looks like. This is a summary of all the stories we tell people so that they can understand issues relating to the counseling that we've talked to them about. And one of the things that we often don't have a whole lot of time for to discuss with our clients when they're doing their counseling up front is to talk about their personal legacy, the stories that they have. And most recently, we've found out that it isn't just the stories of where you've come from, but also people need to really talk about the story of where they want to go. So we've recently read the book by Atul Gawande called Being Mortal. We're talking to our advisory board about it. And we'd like to put together a program for our Step 2 members called What's Your Story? So that everybody will have the opportunity, if they join that particular program, to talk about their story about where they've been and to get help talking about their story about where they want to go. a lot of that has to do with, I've recently put a page on our website about what happens often, even if someone is very careful to do a healthcare proxy and medical directives, if the people that they're directing don't actually know what those are by having a conversation or otherwise, or even know that they have them, they aren't going to get followed. So you can end up with medical treatments that you didn't really want, just because you're not able to, you're not in the position to be able to talk to the doctors, and the people that you want to help you don't actually know what your wishes were. And there's a lengthy story that we can tell about how we want things to go as we get older. So that's, we're looking forward to actually having a program that'll allow people to work on that kind of thing. Now, so the second step is to commit yourself and your family to a formal and continuous maintenance and education program. Of course, the reason for that is that there are three types of change in an estate plan. There are personal situation changes, personal and financial, changes in your life. There are changes in the law, of course. We've had a lot of changes, particularly tax and non-tax, over the last few years. And in the non-tax area, there have been some substantial changes relating to IRAs and personal protections. You can't actually get creditor protection for your retirement account for the people that inherit it without a trust now, because an inherited IRA is now subject to people's creditors. So there's been some major changes in the law that we didn't anticipate. I think most people didn't really anticipate. And often you don't anticipate those. So that's one of the reasons why we have a maintenance program, so that we can update things based on changes in the law. And then, of course, there's changes in learning, both for the client and for the attorney that's helping them. So those are the three types of changes: life, law, and learning. So here's the major issue. What I'd like to talk about now is what the actual year looks like overall. Actually, let me do that in a new screen, a new tab. So this is an explanation that Step 2 year in review is really it's not a calendar. What it is an explanation of the various different things that go on throughout the year and when they come. So you know that in January is the enrollment. We send out bills for every year, and everybody can voluntarily enroll by paying their dues and sending in their enrollment. In February, we send out the calendar for the year, along with the asset review report reminders to the clients, so that they will start updating their asset review reports, which I'll talk about in a second, and mail them into the firm. Then during March, that's when those are due. In April, we update everybody's information in our system based on the asset review reports. And then in May, we have our annual client meetings. At that time, we give back the updated asset detail report. We give people an asset review report that shows where they are in their funding, because we're finding that a lot of people aren't completely funded yet, and that's important. And then, of course, estate planning review worksheets. If the client is actually doing their document update that year. Then in July and August, we ask clients to send us their estate planning review worksheets, also referred to as EPRWs. And in September and October, we have our update meetings for the documents. And then in October, November, and December, we have nuts and bolts classes, just like we have in the spring. So that's in general the year in review, and you can get that from the website by signing in and downloading that document. So I just want to emphasize the funding review system, because this is really important. It isn't just the documents you need to have updated, because if one of the keys to a successful estate plan is proper asset ownership, we know that asset ownership is very fluid for most people. They get new assets, they get rid of old assets, and in that process, there is a titling. We need to make sure that things are actually owned the way they're supposed to own, and that ownership lines up with your instructions. So in February, you're supposed to turn in your asset detail report. with any changes. Now that's located in the Blue Book that we give you an update at the annual client meeting. So you'll have that throughout the year, but of course if you can't find it or you don't know where it is, you can always go to the website and you can download it. I'm sorry, no, you can't download it because each one of those asset detail reports is specific to the client. So it's really important that you make sure you have it in your Blue Book. That's why we make sure your Blue Book is updated every year at the annual client meeting to make sure that you have it. So we need to have those turned in by April so that we have some time between April and May to put in everybody's records to make sure they're all accurate in our system. And of course, the purpose for that has to do with the cost of estate settlement. So the annual client meeting then comes up, and at that point, we review the updated asset detail reports, and we provide an asset review report that actually shows specifically which assets are fully funded. So the asset reports kind of look like this. This is one for William and Mary Sample. They're our favorite planning clients. So Bill and Mary have assets on their asset detail report. This is their asset review report. Let me just go back up to the asset detail report. So here's their asset detail report, which they'll have in their Blue Books. So we want them to review this and update the information about the accounts, what the values on the accounts are. If they have new accounts, we want them to tell us about the new accounts, and we have in our website there is actually a document for that. That's the new asset form. So you can download the new asset form from the website, and that's what it looks like right here. So that's Bill and Mary Sample's asset detail report, and at the bottom of it, it lists everything, of course, and then at the bottom of it, there's a confirmation statement. So we ask people to check off whether this asset detail report actually reflects what they have, or if there's changes or errors in it, and then tell us what the errors are, sign it, and date it. That's what we want people to send back to us by the end of March in every year. So then at the annual client meeting, we have updated those, reprinted them, and we put them into the Blue Book at the time of the ACM. Also, if it turns out that we find that some of your assets aren't fully funded, you'll get this report. Now, you'll see that for Bill and Mary, they have, for example, a bank account here that does not have a check mark next to it. And here's what the code is. If it's got a check mark, that means that it's verified. Verified means that we actually have some kind of documentation that shows that the ownership of that asset is actually as it is indicated on the report. But in this case, the bank account, the checking account, isn't verified because there's no check mark. You'll also see down here that there's a motor vehicle that actually belongs to Bill, but Bill and Mary have instructed us not to title that, which is normal for what we do because we don't generally want to have the vehicle in the Revocable Living Trust for a bunch of different reasons in Massachusetts. So if it's not funded per client, then it has an X in it, and that's what that means here. We don't actually fund anything outside of the firm, so you won't see any stars on any of our reports. But here you can see that Bill and Mary have sort of not given us updated information about their bank account or their DWS investment account. And there's everything else is checked off. So those are a couple of things that we would like them to focus on because, you know, if things aren't completely verified, then we can't, when people call us up and say something's happened to you, we can't say everything is ready. And that's really what you want to be able to have us do. So that's what happens at the annual client meeting. Among other things, we return the updated asset detail report and we provide the asset review report to show whether you are actually fully funded. So Then in June of the year, we have our, that's right, the annual client meetings are actually in June of every year. And the agenda for that is, there's many items of agenda, but let me sort of explain where the annual client meetings came from as a matter of history. Other members of the network who started doing the three-step strategy many years ago used to have only the annual client updates, which was the document updates, and then they began to have a number of clients, and it became quite a chore to do everybody every year. So they decided that they were going to update everybody's documents every other year, like we do. Actually, we copied them. But as a byproduct of that, the people who were not having their document updates done, which is when they would provide a lot of information about the firm and changes in the law, etc., they would call up and say, is there anything I need to know about? So people began to get a little bit concerned that they were missing something in the year when they weren't having their documents updated. And that was the actual reason why we began, as a national network, began to do annual client meetings. So the agenda for the annual client meeting is to talk about the status of the firm, where we're headed, important announcements about that this year, new program developments. For example, we'll be talking about the What's Your Story program. We'll be talking about the document updates and the kinds of things that will be updated this year in clients' documents. Often we give checklists for people who are updating to tell us whether they'd like to have something that we've explained in the annual client meeting or not. Of course, we do the Blue Book updates, as I've explained, and then we often give some form of education, formal education, about a particular topic that's particularly relevant right now. This year, it looks like we're going to be giving an education program for maybe 3/4 of an hour on the new medical system and the kinds of things that we need to be careful about in living in the new age of healthcare under Obamacare. And then, of course, one of the things that we'll talk about is what the fees look like for the following year. So then there's the client update meeting. That occurs in September or October of each year, and that's based on the estate planning review worksheet. Now, the estate planning review worksheet will be placed in your Blue Book at the annual client meeting. That's why attendance at the annual client meeting is essential. It's mandatory, so that particularly if you are going to be updating your documents this year, you need to get your estate planning review worksheet, and that goes into your Blue Book. We basically update your Blue Book with inserts and that kind of thing at the annual client meeting. So in the estate planning review worksheet, there's a description of the content of your plan. It includes only, it's included in the Blue Book only in the year of your update. And the purpose of it is so that you can tell us what word processing changes need to be made in your plan. So for example, if you want to change your trustees, that's a word processing change. If you want to change your healthcare proxy, that's a word processing change. And so I'm going to give you an example here. This is actually my EPRW from a couple of years ago. So here's the estate planning review worksheet. And, I went through and I said, okay, who do I want to have my trustees? Who are my successor trustees? Do I want to make any changes? And there were a couple of changes. One of them primarily because my daughter has moved to Israel and is no longer living in the United States. So her role as a trustee and as a person who has a power of attorney or might have a power of attorney or as a healthcare proxy has to be diminished because she's out of the country. So I had to make some changes on that basis. And so I went through it and I indicated the changes in the way I wanted things to be set up so that when the documents are ready for me at the client update program in the fall, everything will be shown. And I said I authorized the changes and I signed it and dated it. Oh, by the way, notice that the date is September 10th of that year. That's late. We need to have these back much earlier than that because it takes quite a bit of time for us to get all of those documents ready. We have a number of people and often they're couples, so that everybody's redoing, maybe 10 or 12 documents each. So there's a lot of paperwork and updating work to be done. So you can't come in late like Frank Bridges did in that year and expect to actually have your documents done quickly and properly. So this year we'd like to have all of the PRWs back by the end of July so that we have plenty of time in August to put everything together. Also part of that, there's some a last page for miscellaneous issues that you can report to us about various different things that have changed. So in this particular instance, I had a change of my my primary care physician, and also I wanted to report my grandchildren. So these are things that you can check off and report to us so that we're sure. And that's important because one of the things that happens that is part of the estate planning review worksheet is that we update it at the CUP meeting, and we give it back to you at that point in your red book. And if you bring your blue book, we'll give you a copy for your blue book. And on that, if there are changes that have been made, or if we see that there are changes in your finances that have been made that affect your plan, that's the time that we're going to give you an alert. Alerts can tell you that there are issues that you need to face based on the funding that we've noticed, or based on the fact that perhaps you've gone over the federal limit on whether you have a taxable estate or not, or maybe you've gone over the Massachusetts exclusion amount over $1 million, so or $2 million for a couple. So it's important for us to keep up to date with you and to let you know when there's a time that you need to have some counseling. So the purpose of the alerts is to let you know that it might be appropriate for you to come in for some counseling and then to talk about the kinds of things that need to be done in your planning. So that's the estate planning review worksheet, and that's how we go about making the update meetings in the fall. Those, of course, are group meetings, and we have this year we have 2, so people can register. We need to have people register in plenty of time before them, so we know how many people are coming. We can have refreshments and the right number of seats. This year we'll be doing them, by the way, at the Newton Marriott. So this is an important part of the annual program, and it's an important detail that people need to pay attention to. So the third step in the 3-step strategy is to secure appropriate assistance for you and your family to transfer your wisdom along with the rest of your wealth. So what is appropriate assistance? So when we explain this to clients when they're beginning to understand how we work, we tell them first is that the controlled cost. Controlled cost, full disclosure, and true peace of mind. Those are the appropriate assistance objectives. So the keys to controlling costs, and by costs we mean the cost of estate, the various different costs of estate planning and settlement. So one of the keys is full funding, as we've talked about. And one of the reasons that full funding, that we have our program, we make sure that we do funding ongoing for our Step 2 clients, so that just to remind everybody, if you've made a change in your assets, we want to do the funding for you so that it gets titled properly. We often do deeds for people when they're refinancing their house, and then do the deeds back to their trust, because oftentimes the mortgage companies don't want to have it in a trust when they're giving a loan. Or if people sell their property, or if people are buying the property, new property, we will do the deeds. If it's a Massachusetts deed, if you're moving to a new bank, we want to do the funding for that to make sure that your accounts are properly titled. And so full funding means that it's ongoing, and we want to hear from you when you're making a change like that. And then, of course, there's proactive trustee and beneficiary training. By that we mean if everybody knows, this is learning about what to do, how to do it, and how to pay for it. So that's trustee and beneficiary training. So part of the proactive training is the Empowered Legacy session. That's today. And then we have our nuts and bolts programs. The first is the disability settlement. This is an explanation to people, and this will be people who are your helpers as well as yourself, about what happens if somebody becomes disabled And as time is going by, we are including a lot more in terms of Medicaid planning and elder law, in terms of disability settlement in our program. More to come about that at the annual client meeting this year. And then, of course, what happens if somebody dies. And it's important for people to understand if they're going to be a successor trustee, like children or friends or whoever that might be, what is their role? So on the website, when people actually sign in to the Step 2 program, we have the nuts and bolts programs, links to them. They're actually YouTube programs from last year. We have nuts and bolts of disability right here. We have the nuts and bolts trustee training for estate settlement from last year. And note here that there's something called an attendance confirmation. What that is a document. It's basically a quiz, so that if a helper goes to the program and takes the program, listens to the whole program, if they can answer this question and send it back to us, we now know that they have participated. Because one of the commitments that clients make to us, and of course we make commitments to them, is that they're going to have their helpers attend these nuts and bolts classes. So we'll talk about a little bit why that's important. One of the other things is that the website now allows our helpers to actually register so that they can give us, so they put in their name here, they would put in their email and confirm it and give us a telephone number, tell us who it is that they're visiting us on behalf of as a helper, and if they have any comments or questions about the program, they can put it here. And then they can send it to us and we'll get an email about who they are. But if they want to really qualify themselves as part of the Step 2 program, they should fill out and send back the attendance confirmation. So that's on the website. And now let me talk a little bit about the 5-year rule. We'll talk a little bit about what the fees for estate settlement are and what our commitments to the clients are in a couple of minutes. But those fees are contingent on the helpers actually having participated in the program by attending nuts and bolts. And last year we adopted something called the 5-year rule, which means that if your helpers have attended nuts and bolts somewhere in the last 5 years, sometime in the last 5 years prior to your death, then the advantageous pricing structure that we've talked about and that we have in our agreement will be available to them. So we'll move on to that very shortly. But that's the 5-year rule. Now, so let's talk about full disclosure. And what we mean by this is full disclosure of costs. We want everybody to understand what the overall costs of estate planning are. So here's what the factors of the overall cost are. A lot of times when we get questions like, okay, how much will you charge me for it, meaning an estate plan or estate planning documents, all people are asking about is the cost of the documents, when really they need to know about the cost of updating or failing to update, because their plan will get out of date and that will be much more expensive in the estate settlement if it is. And then what are the costs after they die? What's the cost to transfer assets? What are the costs for death tax return preparation? And it's very unusual for clients to even expect to be able to get an answer to that when they're doing the planning, because most lawyers will tell you, I can't really tell you how much it's going to cost to sell your estate because I don't know what you're going to have at that time, and I don't know what your plan's going to look like at that time, and I don't know who's going to be involved, so I can't really tell you how much time and effort it's going to take to sell your estate. Well, the purpose of the Step 2 program is for us to answer most of those questions. So if we know what you have and we know where it is, that takes away the long and difficult process of finding out what you had, which is very time consuming and very expensive. It's the chief cost, in my view, of actually doing estate settlement, is finding out what the decedent actually owned and what it was worth. So that's a major part of the cost of estate settlement. So finding out what all of that's worth is very important. And so we want to be able to answer the question, well, how much will it cost me to actually settle my estate? Because until you actually have that answer, until the helpers have that answer, they really aren't going to be in control of their estate settlement. So, and we want people to understand what the rest of the fees are besides the upfront fees. That's the trust settlement administration for both disability and death, preparation of death tax returns, and probate services. And traditionally, around the country, if there's a probate, in many cases even with revocable living trusts, there's a probate settlement. On average, the legal fees are at 2 to 3% of the value of the assets at the time of death. If there's a standard living trust planning program or plan, it's a little bit less than actually doing probate, but that's 1.5 to 2.5% of the value of the assets at the time of death. Sometimes people actually have both of those because they end up with assets that have to go through probate and their will says, please give it to my living trust. So they end up with a probate settlement and a living trust settlement, which is no good. Our theory is if people follow the three-step strategy and are diligent in the maintenance of their plans, that the overall cost of their estate plan, and that includes both the upfront cost of preparing the plan and getting the counseling and doing the documentation and getting the funding started, as well as estate settlement, should never exceed 1 to 2% overall. So you know that we have a 0.5% of the value of the assets as our parameter. That's not the fee, but that's basically the guideline for what the fees should be up front with a minimum and a maximum. And then you can see that there is 1.5% left over for estate settlement if that comes along. So our theory is that the total of estate settlement overall cost should never exceed 1 to 2% of the value of the assets. So how does that work? Well, that's where we come to the proactive engagement approach. So if you go to the website, you'll be able to see, let me just show you on the website, that we actually have the both the investment summary, which lists the specifics of people's of the costs that we've explained to people, as well as the Step 2 program's member agreement. So if you want to see the most current one that you can download, but everyone who's in the program has signed it, and everybody who is a new client who's joining the program has signed it. And the investment summary is something that we now use to explain the whole program to people up front, even before they start their planning. So I want to show you, the purpose of the member agreement, and I'll just open that up in a new tab, is really to outline all of the various different things that we as the law firm are going to do. There are just a few minor things that we're asking clients to acknowledge relating to how we store assets and how long we're going to keep them. But most of what's in this agreement, and it's fairly long, has to do with the kind of things that we're going to provide to the clients, what our communication policy is. It outlines what clients' commitments to us are that they've already made at the time they did their planning. It talks about the CUP program, the document updates, the specifics of all of that and what we do. And so that's what the member agreement does. And it's a fairly lengthy summary of all the details of what we do to help people maintain their plans. And then, of course, there is the investment summary. So I want to take a couple of minutes to go over that with you so that you'll be reminded of exactly what that is. So here's the investment summary that we're using now with our clients as they come in new, and this is the investment summary that all of our Step 2 clients have. So, the upfront costs, and here's what we right in this point right here, we would normally put the person's upfront fee for the counseling and design process to get the documents prepared and to go through the counseling process that you're all familiar with. Then there's the maintenance and education program. So there's the first year, and for our current first year program for the maintenance education is $995. And then the annual program for the Step 2 program is $495. So annually that number right there is $495. Now, what most people don't realize is that once a person has died, or even when they become disabled, their successor trustees take over and they need help to maintain the plan as well. As it turns out, we can actually update the documents because we can be appointed as the trust protector. So we can update documents for legal purposes, updating the boilerplate and some other things. So we have something called the survivor support system where they can actually be part of our maintenance program, and we have some special things that we do for them. And that annual fee, again, is $495. So those are the basic program fees, and then we have the settlement. Now there are two fundamental options. There's the fixed fee option, that's right here, and then there's the variable fee option. Frankly, we've never had anybody adopt the variable fee option because what that means is we're going to do all of these things, but the fee is variable. It's basically designed for what happens if somebody wants to have a reduced upfront cost. Then in that case we'll provide them with a variable fee option, so their actual estate settlement costs are going to be higher. So based on the first $5 million under the federal gross coupon estate, their estate settlement costs would be around 2%. And then if they have up to 2 times the current coupon, in other words, up to $10 million, then the next $5 million would be 1.5% would be the guideline. And then over that $10 million figure, the guideline would be 1.25%, with of course a minimum of 6%. But most people have adopted the fixed fee option. Actually, all people in our program so far have adopted the fixed fee option. And last year, of course, we made the change that the fee is going to be 1.25% as a cap of the federal gross estate, and if there's no federal gross estate, then we use the Massachusetts gross estate. But if people have participated, and that's where the 5-year rule comes in, that cap is reduced to 0.75% of the value of the assets. So that occurs both if there's a couple, that number occurs relating to both each spouse's estate, but of course the first spouse to die will end up with a family trust, and a lot of their assets won't be subject to this fee because it won't be subject to the second spouse's federal estate. So again, there's a $6,000 minimum, and that's of course subject to the terms of the Step 2 program member agreement, meaning participation is required. Now, we've recently taken on that we realize that it's really important for us to do death tax returns. And so we've had some, unfortunately, not so hot experiences with some accountants that have been involved in doing estate settlement on the client side. So we've added on the ability to have death tax return preparation. That does take a little bit more money. Typically we haven't done those, but we're doing them now. We're also doing gift tax returns as well. And those are included at up to an additional 0.5% of the value of the assets, so that we can get that done. And I'm frankly realizing that since we give the accountants the information up front and then they ask us to review the return, we end up doing just about the same amount of work to have somebody else do it as if we did it ourselves. Now, there are some clients who have left the program sometimes, and for various different reasons, and they want to come back. So we call those dormant clients. And then typically what we do is we have them come back in and pay the initial fee for joining the program, that $995, because of course we have to go through to make sure everything is updated, that we have to check all of their funding, and we have to get them realigned with our maintenance program. So that's how all of that works. So when a client actually comes in to begin their planning, they will see that they have, we disclose all of the various different fees that they're actually signing up for, both while they're alive and if they become disabled or if they die. Here's the disability fees down here. So it's important to understand, though, that the although we are committed to the fixed fee option or the variable fee option, that is not an agreement that the successor trustees or people who are actually settling the estate are bound to. It would be unethical for us to bind the client and their successors to a specific fee agreement. It is only us that are bound to offer it based on the terms of the member agreement. So it's important to make sure that the successor trustees, make sure you understand that the successor trustees are the ones who hire us based on whether they think we're providing a reasonable service, as opposed to the services that would be provided by someone else at a cost. And so far our success rate in terms of people hiring us is 100% in terms of estate settlement. And it makes sense because it's going to be very difficult to have someone else who doesn't know where everything is and who hasn't got the process down to actually do an estate settlement for the decedent and their family at the price that we're committed to. So just to review what we've talked about, I gave you a quick review, background review of the program. I've talked to you about the Step 2 website and how to get into it. I've gone over the year in review and the picture of what the whole program looks like for the entire year. We've talked about the details of the funding updates and the annual client meeting. And the Blue Book. We've talked about the client update program, the importance of the Blue Book, of course, and the member agreement, the investment summary, and I've explained the personal legacy program, which is the What's Your Story program. So for all of that, appropriate assistance is primarily designed to make sure that you have peace of mind to know that when people call us up, we're prepared to say, okay, we're all ready, but we need your help to make us ready during the maintenance program. As I've said many times to people before, the maintenance program is basically you doing estate settlement up front. And I hope that this has been helpful. Again, if you have questions, feel free to contact us. We're very happy to answer questions for people who have actually participated in the program. If we can answer your question on the phone, there's no clock involved, there's no charge involved. That's part of the maintenance program. That's called our first call privilege for our maintenance program. And that's for both clients and their helpers who participated. So I want to find out if there's anybody that has any questions. I'll just leave this open for a moment. I have a question from Judy. Will there be an online version of this and other webinars? And the answer is yes. This session is being recorded, and my plan is to, once it's converted, to actually put it up on the Step 2 members website as a resource for people to look at. Any other questions? And by the way, I should probably say this is probably the only time that I'll be recording it. In the future, our programs, the Empowered Legacy session will be for individual clients and will be given on appointment with them. All right, well, if there are no other questions, I'm going to sign off and thank you very much for participating. Again, feel free to give us a call if you have any questions, and I look forward to hearing from you.